Hello everyone and welcome back to the Tavern. Today we're going to be taking a look at a newer game that has recently started to blow up with popularity. That game is Halls of Torment, so let's not waste any time and hop right in. Really quickly though, my average viewer duration is pretty low, so if you're thinking about clicking off this video, do me a huge favor and leave me a quick comment letting me know what I can do to better retain viewers like you. So with that being said, let's hop right into the game. The first screen we're brought to has the name of the game on fire and wants us to choose a hero. We only have one option at this point, and that's the swordsman. So we choose him and it brings us straight into the game. Now when I bring up the menu, I notice that my cursor is not properly behaving. It's registering as if it's halfway across the screen, and it wasn't until I accidentally disabled performance mode that it actually fixed this. The devs definitely need to get that fixed, because if I hadn't stumbled upon that solution, I would have had to try and Google it, which brings me out of the game and can definitely make someone close your game and never think about playing it again. This is especially true when your game is only $4. As of this point, there's not a lot of sunken cost in money or time, so the odds of just quitting the game is much higher. So we start exploring around and we see the same campfire from the menu and 4 large stones around us. We go up to the double doors and that brings us to a new room where we are now in the actual game. WASD movement, and I enable auto attacks so that they happen naturally in the direction of my mouse cursor. So a little bit more about this game. Halls of Torment is a roguelite level-based game where many enemies endlessly spawn around you and try to kill you for 30 minutes. Your objective is simple: survive, kill enemies, level up, and beat the level. As you're doing this, you will collect gold, which we will go over more in depth later, and you can also gather new abilities by finding scrolls or having them drop off bosses. The game also has a gear system that is reminiscent of an RPG. It lets you equip gear to various slots that will give you certain boosts to your character. There's a lot more to this gear system, but we'll be going more in depth on that later. Now, to point out the obvious, if you've ever played Vampire Survivor, then you're going to notice a lot of similarities here. However, I can already tell that there are enough differences in this game where I think it can definitely stand on its own. Basically, I don't think this game would exist without Vampire Survivors, however I wouldn't call it a clone. The game feels more like Diablo 2 and Vampire Survivors got stuck in a soulstone together. Going back to gameplay, you have to be very careful when traversing around in this game not to get surrounded or overwhelmed, or you can die very quickly. But you also want to maximize the amount of experience you're picking up off enemies when they die. This makes it very tempting to just run in a big circle around killing packs of enemies. However, there are items and skills located around the map, which is enough of an incentive to keep it beneficial to actually move around instead of farming in one spot. So after a little while of gameplay, we get our first boss. You can immediately recognize bosses and mini-bosses in the game because they are bigger than the other enemies, and they're the only enemies in the game with health bars. As we're kiting the boss, we end up coming across another mini-boss and kite them both over to where we find our first new ability. This ability is called Arcane Splinters. This will shoot out short-range stars that spin in place for a duration, doing moderate damage to any enemies they come into contact with. Doesn't feel like the best ability to start, but with some level ups to buff it, maybe it could be. After killing the boss, he drops another ability called Phantom Needles. This shoots off projectiles at the enemies closest to you. I find this ability best utilized for burning down bosses and mini-bosses quickly. So after a bit of time in our first run, we start coming across more unique enemies. At first we're seeing regular silver slimes, but now we see green slimes that drop a puddle on death and that will deal damage to you if you step into it. We also start dealing with fast-moving creatures that move on all fours. They don't deal a lot of damage, but they move very fast and come in very large numbers. But if you play smart, they can help you get a few levels really quickly. Skeletons are also starting to come in new varieties. We've got basic skeletons, shielded skeletons with high defense, skeletons with weapons that do more damage, and armored skeletons with weapons that basically have both defense and higher attack. Around the 18-minute mark, the level starts getting really intense, with new enemies and bosses just coming constantly. Enemies are starting to move extremely fast now, and we eventually die around the 20-minute mark. A quick recap for that run: we survived 20 minutes and 44 seconds, got 2,285 gold, and 3 items, which we'll discuss in a moment. After we die, we're brought to a game over screen that shows you everything I just told you about, as well as how much total damage and DPS we did with each of our abilities, and a list of quests we apparently completed that I didn't even know we had. So we click return to camp, and immediately the large rocks that I've heard the pioneers used to ride for miles break apart into obelisks. We now see we've unlocked a new character called the Archer. This appears to be a ranged bow wielding class, so we try them out. Before leaving, we go to check out these obelisks. We learn that one of them is called the Shrine of Blessings, and we can use it to purchase permanent upgrades for gold. I believe these do transfer in between characters as well, so it acts as an account-wide progression system. The next obelisk shows us our quests. Quests are on a grid system, and you can't unlock a new quest until you complete the quest adjacent to it. Quests entail killing a certain amount of enemies, doing enough damage with specific abilities, and they can be used to unlock new traits, equipment, characters, and abilities. Oh, and some just give you gold. We also see that there are milestones and story quests on other tabs. These essentially function the same way. The last obelisk just functions as a level select that we can use to select which level we'd like to try. So we put some upgrades into damage and movement speed and one last one into radius and start our next run. Immediately upon starting the next run, we realize that gear does not carry over between runs. So other than the upgrades we just bought at the campfire, we are back at square one. We also notice that every run will start with a magnet item that pulls in an EXP on the ground to the player, and an ability scroll that you can go to and pick up. We start heading towards the ability. So the archer shoots 2 arrows at a time. She does less damage with each hit than the swordsman, but that balances out because she's able to fight from much further away. Her arrows can also go through enemies, but it's only to a certain extent. We come across bloodstained pages and we actually get a little bit of lore, and by God, this game has voice acting. We learn of a trail of blood that led someone into darkness where they found 2 morbid shrines. Each demanded a sacrifice for a powerful token. The token betrayed its original master and would give them the power to finally end his atrocious reign. At this point, we have no idea who he is referring to, but I find this really interesting. We're being introduced to some evil entity that's presumably commanding all these demons that we're fighting. Having read that, we carry on. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that there are barrels all around the arena that you want to destroy because they can give you gold or even have items inside them. So we make it to the ability scroll and find a new ability we haven't seen before. This one's called Ring Blades. Doesn't seem very good, but for the sake of testing out as many things as I can for the video, I take it anyways. However, I have to say that I'm very quickly pleasantly surprised. It actually seems like a pretty solid ability, and I think it would be much better suited for the swordsman, but it's not terrible for the archer either. So we fight through that run. We don't really come across anything new, but I'll put a couple highlights here for you though. And we died almost 17 minutes with the archer. It's not a bad character at all, and I'm sure some people would love it, but for this game, it just doesn't really fit the playstyle that I like, so we head back to town after that run, grab some new upgrades, and get ready for another run. Also, it's worth noting that you can refund all your upgrades at any time if you decide you're not happy with your choices or want to reinvest somewhere else. We do another run with the swordsman, and this time we survive for just under 23 minutes. At the 22-minute mark, there was a huge difficulty spike, and I was really no longer able to kill the enemies that were spawning. So we head back to town with 4,000 gold to show for our run and get some new upgrades, and this time we decide to check out level 2. 2 things immediately stand out on level 2. The first is that these enemies are way tougher, taking up to 4 hits to bring them down. The second thing we notice is that a man in a cage nearby is calling out for help, so we head over and talk to him.
Praise the gods! Another mortal soul! I beg of you, release me from this wretched cage. The key must be somewhere nearby.
We learn that his name is Asif the Well Keeper, and he pleads for us to let him out of his cage, and he tells us the key must be nearby. We find the key pretty quickly and make our way back over to him. He pleads with us again to let him out, and we do so.
You're back! Please, free me from this accursed place. Quick, the shadows are closing in.
We realize pretty quickly we're not strong enough to be on this level, so we end up dying and head back to town. Upon returning to town, we see a man walking around and he stops over by a chest. Clicking on this chest quickly reveals that it is now our stash, and all the equipment we picked up on our first runs are here. I'm assuming we can now equip gear here before each run. Talking to the man, we realize it's Asif, the man we just saved. He thanks us and offers us a proposition. He tells us that the well dried up a long time ago, but encourages us to find the other end, and if we do, we can drop trinkets into the bucket and he can hoist it up, making it available for us here. When we talk to him again, we get a window that says there's nothing available to buy. So what I'm assuming at this point is that we can find things out in the world and put them in a well bucket, and after that, they'll be available for purchase from him. That is how it works, and I find that to be really funny. Like, hey adventure, go out and do all this hard work and then you can pay me for the loot. Yeah, that seems fair. So heading back over to the stash, we equip our boots, gloves, and gauntlets from our previous runs and head back out for another one. We can now see that there is a bucket icon on the screen as well, and I assume this has to do with Asif's proposition, so I head over to it. So while we run through the very beginning of this run, I'd like to highlight that this game is only $4. So far it has a very addictive gameplay loop that has me really enjoying myself. I loved Vampire Survivors, and while it does play quite differently, I have to say I'm enjoying it at least as much as that game. We make it over to the bucket and it says we can leave an item here to retrieve it on the surface. So it seems like it does work like I originally thought. The only thing we'll have to see from this point is if we'll have to pay gold to get those items back in town. So we continue our run. I decided to go for a crit focused build this time, so I took every plus crit percentage and plus crit damage ability I could. If there wasn't one of those available, I went for range and area. Once I ran out of those to pick from, it was pickup radius and defensives like block and defense rating. And by God, it worked. I made it through a full 30-minute run. By the end, I was critting enemies for nearly 800 damage. I was curious as to what would happen once I hit 30 minutes, and let me tell you, something definitely happened. Something that made me 100% sure that I like this game even more than Vampire Survivors. At 30 minutes, all enemies despawn, and the boss comes in. He hits fast, and he hits hard. I quickly dash for the well, desperate to get one of my items back up to the surface for future runs. I make it over to the well and send up the ring that gave me plus 40% crit damage. And then, we fight. It was a constant battle of making sure to do consistent damage to him while dodging his non-stop fast attacks. He throws balls everywhere for you to dodge, he charges you leaving explosions in his wake multiple times in a row, and also shoots projectiles in every direction. It was intense, it was chaotic, but most of all, it was fun. Supporting back to town after that run unlocks another new character. I walk over and discover that you do indeed have to buy back your items with gold. I chuckle, and at this time decide it's time for a verdict on Halls of Torment. Graphically, just imagine Diablo 2 without the remaster. It's dark, it's grainy, and it gives a feeling of desperation. Without knowing really anything about the lore yet, I will say the game feels like the world is either lost or almost there. The atmosphere definitely makes you feel like something evil has taken control of the world, and honestly, it's fantastic. Combat is more involved than typical games like this. In those games, they usually auto-attack and auto-aim for you. Now in this game, there is an option for auto-attack and auto-aim, but I highly recommend you use auto-attack but not auto-aim. Being able to aim your attacks gives this game a layer of strategy and tactical planning that many other games like this just don't have. So far in my experience, you also aren't getting a bunch of different abilities that constantly light up the screen. It's more primal than that, and honestly, it makes it feel much better. So, for as simple as it is, I'd say the combat definitely feels good and engaging. Speaking on the story, well, as you know, we haven't seen much yet. But from what we have seen so far, there definitely seems to be more of a story here than in many other games like this one. Maybe later they'll throw the story out the window, but in my first few hours with the game, the drip feed of lore makes you question what's really happening in this world, and it fits perfectly with the look and feel of the world and really had that Diablo 2 vibe to it. I'd definitely say the story seems good and there definitely seems to be some lore here so far. To me, design is actually one of the stronger points for this game so far, and I'll explain why. From the beginning, they just throw you straight into a run similar to how Neon Abyss did. After your first run, they introduce you to the idea of quests and upgrades after you've already completed some of your quest and you already have enough gold to purchase some of the upgrades. Learning about a system that you can already engage with and getting credit for what you've already done beforehand feels really good and rewarding to a player. Another design feature I love is how you can send back one item from your runs. So there's not too much power carryover from run to run, but at the same time, you're not losing everything. What makes this system even more engaging to me is the fact that if you get a good item, you're going to want to use it during that run. This presents the player with this really cool risk-reward decision-making process. Do you wear the item until the end but take the chance of dying and losing it forever? Or do you weaken yourself for this run so you can guarantee you'll have a chance at buying it from the shop and keeping it forever? Even in my run, this kept me on the edge of my seat with that crit ring I sent back. I was constantly dancing back and forth in my mind, terrified that the stage was going to have a sudden ramp in difficulty and leave me dead, causing me to lose the ring. But the run was going so well that I didn't want to take the nerf because I thought I might be able to finish. So if you've made it this far, I think we all know the answer to the question, but we have to ask it anyways. Halls of Torment. Should you play it? Yes. This game is $4. Honestly, even if the game only had one stage, it would be worth the $4. If I had beaten the boss and a window had popped up saying, "Thank you for playing, you win," it would have still been worth the $4. Halls of Torment took a great concept and said, you know what? I think we can do it better. And I would say they did. So that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, you are a genuine legend. Please like and subscribe and stuff. If you like the video, check out my other videos in this series. And as always, have a great week.